Hey, welcome back to the program. It's February 3rd. Great to have you with me again. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, ring the bell for notifications, tell your friends and family. Help me build this channel up a little bit. Want to check in real quick on a few things today. First, let's talk about Zelensky and Trump, Ukraine, Russia, the horrific war that's been going on since February 24th, 2022. Millions of people dead, missing, wounded, cities destroyed, leveled to the ground. Russia jammed up economically, exposed as a weak military, stalemate developing in southeastern Ukraine. As I've said since February 24th, 2022, Ukraine cannot win this war. The only way Ukraine could win this war if US and European troops take over for Ukrainian troops. If we surge in with our full military effort, that's it. Russia did start this war. President Trump said that Zelensky started the war, and I think that was really a misplaced statement. What I think Trump was really implying was Zelensky's lack of recognition of Russia's concerns over Ukraine being in NATO and the efforts by Zelensky to eliminate Russian forces in the Donbass after 2014 is what Trump is alluding to, that there could have been a peaceful negotiation before the war started. That might be what Trump is saying, but clearly Trump is wrong if he thinks that Zelensky started this war. Is clearly Putin. But we can go back all the way to the 1990s and Bill Clinton, an agreement signed between Russia and the United States and the EU that they would not extend NATO east, encroaching on Russia's boundaries. Now, they got away with it a little bit in the Balkans, Estonia, Latvia, Romania, Bulgaria, and then they pushed further. President Bush ended the nuclear framework established over the prior 40 years in the early 2000s. President Obama pushed further on Ukraine and Georgia being in NATO, right on Russia's borders. Think about the Chinese or the Russians trying to gain Canada or Mexico as their ally. Think of Canada and Mexico inviting Chinese or Russian military into their country. I only have to take you back to the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 1960s and see what happened there. The U.S. would never tolerate it. Russia would never tolerate it. Very clearly, Putin is a communist dictator who tried to create a China-esque setup, communist control with free market activity below, governed by the central state. But Trump is right to seek peace here. Trump is right to do whatever necessary to end the carnage, to find some way to mollify Russia's concern about NATO, expansion in the East. And the only question in terms of a deal seems to be, where is the DMZ going to be if a deal is reached? How far back will Russia go from where they are now compared to where they started in February 2022? But Zelensky's wrong. And Zelensky's been advised very poorly by his own staff, by his own team, by his own countrymen. Obviously, misunderstood President Trump completely. President Trump has been talking for years about ending this war. For years of trying to come to some peaceful terms with Russia, coexistence. You have to go back to decades and decades, John F. Kennedy. Who are we to say what system a country can have for their own people? Russia's been a menace for many, 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 many decades. Continues to be. Doesn't have to be. But clearly something we need to be concerned about. And that's why we work to check Russia. But it's not wrong. It's not bad to try to seek peace with Russia, to try to find some common ground with Russia. Russia's not going away. We're not going to break up Russia. America goes to war with Russia in the present state. Russia's only recourse is nuclear weapons. Russia's military cannot stand up to the U.S. military. The only thing they have is nuclear weapons. And if pushed into a corner, what's the probability of using those nuclear weapons? And they're right on our doorstep. Submarines right off our Atlantic coast, our Pacific coast, the Gulf Coast. Zelensky was wrong. in the way he acted in the White House. He was wrong today with his comments that we are very far away from a ceasefire. He's wrong to believe that the European Union, led by the UK, can save his ass in terms of defeating Russia or taking back the territory Russia has claimed in southeastern Ukraine and Crimea. The UK's military could fit in the largest stadium in the world right now easily. Keir Starmer says that he wants UK boots on the ground in Ukraine. Well, guess what? He doesn't have the transportation system to get his troops there. The UK military is nothing. Germany, France, weak militaries. The only thing they have is a combined force. They can somewhat nudge up to what the US could do. But individually as countries, these militaries are completely weak. And NATO, it could have been easily argued that NATO should have been disbanded in the 1990s after the fall of the Soviet Union. NATO is America. NATO's military strength is America. We've been on the hook for this for a long time, and absent the United States, NATO is nothing. The idea that the EU, the UK, is going to salvage Zelensky's efforts in the Ukraine are just wrong. There's deep concern on the right, if the reports are true, that Democrats advise Zelensky to be tough with Trump, to reject the minerals deal. And think about that deal. It's a very interesting and smart ploy here. If we want to maintain a ceasefire for an extended period of time in the future, once it's established, to keep Russia from attacking Ukraine again, to keep Russia from gaining more of Ukraine's territory, put U.S. interests in the Ukraine, put U.S. economic interests, put U.S. companies in there. Russia won't attack U.S. interests. But Zelensky has blown this thing up in his face. Now, what happened in the White House was unnerving. Some might call it an embarrassment. I thought Trump was okay. I thought J.D. Vance was okay. I think Zelensky was completely out of order in the Oval Office to act like that. But you can be sure about something. That stuff goes on behind closed doors all the time. For decades and decades, that type of combative rhetoric, that type of back and forth, two nations pursuing their own interests vehemently, happens all the time. You can be sure of it. For the first time, we saw it in public, up front, in the Oval Office. Zelensky was out of line. Senator Chris Murphy, seems to have affirmed the idea that Democrats advised Zelensky prior to his meeting with Trump how to behave, how to act, to try to get Trump's ire up. You know, that's the common thing they do, right? They did in the debate stage, try to get Trump all revved up, get him lashing out. But this is going to fail. Absent the U.S., Ukraine would have lost Ukraine already. So Zelensky needs to rethink this. He did say today that he's willing to sign the minerals deal, but then later on in the day, he came out after meetings with the EU leadership that they're far, far away from a ceasefire or ending the war. And let's face it, that is not what Trump wants. Trump campaigned on it. He wants the end of the war. He doesn't want to spend his campaign, his time in office focused on the Ukraine-Russia war. He doesn't want to be part of this loser. And that's what this is. This is a loser for Trump. Biden kept stringing Zelensky along, giving just enough what he needed to maintain this quagmire, this stalemate in southeastern Ukraine. We need to bring this war to an end. Zelensky needs to either change his attitude, change his mind, change his outlook on what is possible, or get out. NATO and Ukraine will not be one. As long as NATO, the EU, is advocating for Ukraine to be part of NATO, or Georgia, again, as part of NATO, we're going to have war with Russia. Russia does not want NATO on its border, able to fire on Moscow missiles that will land in 7 minutes, a decapitation strike without question. And we wouldn't want the same. China wouldn't want it. Trump is bombastic. He speaks off the cuff. He's often exaggerating, misspeaking. But he's right on this, and he's determined. And after Zelensky said today that we're far, far away from a ceasefire ending this war, Trump warned them again. We are close to getting out. If the United States stops supporting Ukraine, it's over. And I don't mean that the war ends. I mean that Ukraine is going to get taken over by Russia. Does NATO want Russia on their borders? Does NATO want Russian control of Ukraine? Then there's Belarus just to the north. And I am not one that believes that Russia's intent on taking over Europe. There's been no indication that Russia wants to take over Europe. There's lots of bombastic rhetoric from public figures in Russia saying we should nuke Paris and London and Munich. Russia just doesn't want NATO on its border. That's it. Same thing happened with Georgia in 2008. Barack Obama blew that. There was an effort to bring Georgia into NATO. Russia said no. The NATO allies continued to push on it, and Russia said, you know what, we're going to take out Georgia. And Georgia was destroyed. All right, enough of that. Quick turn to trade and GDP and economic growth. The U.S. trade balance in goods only for the month of January, minus $153 billion, a new all-time record for a trade deficit for the U.S. economy, largely driven by the threat of Trump tariffs on Chinese and other Asian economies, plus Mexico, Canada, and the EU. So let's get as much goods as we can into the United States before these tariffs take effect. And this huge jump in the trade deficit, worsening, is going to bring down first quarter GDP close to zero or possibly negative. So we have some real economic challenges there. When we think of the calculation for gross domestic product, it's personal consumption expenditures, plus gross private domestic investment, plus government spending, plus net exports, exports minus imports. And that last factor, exports minus imports, is a big old negative. And the more that number goes negative, the more GDP drops. Now, there is some net effect in terms of increased consumption from the cheaper goods. So C rises a little bit, personal consumption expenditures rise a little bit, but the trade deficit's this large, GDP goes towards zero and negative. Now, I say this repeatedly, the problems America faces on the budget side, on the trade side, can only be fixed with pain. There is no painless solution to eliminating our budget deficit. There's no painless solution to reducing our national debt. There's no painless solution for reversing our $1.3 trillion annual trade deficit. People will feel this. Consumers that buy imported goods, workers that work for federal government, that's just how it's going to go. You want to cut government spending? Guess what? Jobs are going to go away, period. So there's lots of consternation from the left, obviously, about Doge, about this efficiency effort. So far, we're talking about tens of billions of dollars. And by the way, nothing legally has changed. We've stopped spending money, but that money that's available to be spent has to be stopped by Congress. And we look at the budget resolution passed last week by the U.S. House and Republicans and the 10-year projections, which is ridiculous. Why we do 10-year projections is beyond me. It's just silly. But the budget they're talking about includes trillion-dollar deficits for the next 5 years. President Trump campaigned on eliminating deficits, on reducing the debt. There's nothing in the current legislation that follows through on that. And so if you're concerned about what Doge is doing, wait till we really have to have a battle about what's going to happen with the budget. Now, Democrats are threatening to shut down the government over the budget deal that's coming by mid-March. Fine, go for it. But we have a serious spending problem, and we have the net interest payments to show for it. Net interest payments on the national debt, the second largest expenditure for the U.S. economy for the first time, over $1 trillion a year. It's unsustainable. And then lastly, let's check in on Trump, the conservative. Remember, Trump was a Democrat, turned Republican. I think he turned conservative, and now I think he's turned libertarian. I think the libertarians, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, crypto gods, crypto kings that Trump speaks to. I think Trump's gone libertarian. He's an advocate for Bitcoin. He's going to have a cryptocurrency summit at the White House. Cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, are Ponzi schemes. He's thinking about creating a sovereign wealth fund and deciding which cryptocurrencies he's going to include in the fund. What a giveaway to the crypto world. The only value in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies is someone else coming in to buy it. He's all in on AI. He's all in on possibly eliminating the Fed. He wants to privatize the post office. He wants to offer a $5,000 rebate to Americans off the savings of Doge. What a huge mistake that would be. He campaigned against President Biden doing the exact same thing because it's inflationary. There's talk about increasing salaries of members of Congress to help them reduce the incentive of skimming off the top, taking bribes, doing unethical things to gain more income. We're off track here. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Always try to buy American.